Alright, hi guys, I hope y'all are all doing well today, and I chose my presentation topic to be on sensory-based feeding disorders. So I titled my lecture, What Do You Need to Know About Sensory-Based Feeding Disorders? So, there's 7 senses that we rely on. Those include vision, auditory, smell, touch, proprioception, vestibular, and finally taste. The mouth is part of the body, and just like the body, it can have sensory issues. Feeding relates to sensory through the body because it's all connected. Feeding is part of the process, and it's important to recognize when we see problems occurring because the earlier we can identify what's going on and integrate these sensory issues, the better the outcome. So Jane Ayres, here's a quote from her, says sensory integration is the process by which people register, modulate, and discriminate sensations received through the sensory system to produce purposeful, adaptive behaviors in response to the environment. So just a little introduction on sensory-based feeding disorders. You usually see where they don't want to eat certain foods because of new textures or taste. The cause is unknown at the moment. There isn't a for sure cause, but there's limited food that the child's going to be able to, or that the child is going to eat. So it's important to remember that when doing sensory-based feeding disorders, every plan is going to be different, so it's going to have to be individualized for the child, for each different child. So often called picky eaters, and there's no physical inability to swallow or chew, and there may be signs of malnutrition. So symptoms. And like I said, there's no physical problems with swallowing and chewing, because if there's physical problems, then that's not going to be sensory. So those are two completely different things going on there. So liquids are going to be easier than solid foods, and then foods hold in mouth to avoid swallowing. So they might be pocketing their food and stuff like that just to avoid swallowing. There could be crying while eating. Body language there could be shaking the hand, shaking head, very unconsolable, and maybe some gagging going on there. And you're often going to see weight loss, which goes along with that malnutrition part I was just talking about. So here's just a little thing. So when you're talking about feeding disorders, they're broken up between picky eaters and problem eaters. So picky eaters, you can see in this picture here that there's quite a few different food types there, but there's not a ton of different options. So picky eaters are usually 30 foods or more, and they can handle new foods on their plate but may not try it. And they're often going to be eating from more than one food group. So they might like salty, they might like sweet, but on the other hand, problem eaters are going to be 20 foods or less. So you see this child might only eat chicken nuggets, but not only are they not going to eat, they're only going to eat chicken nuggets, they might only eat McDonald's chicken nuggets, but they won't eat Wendy's chicken nuggets. They're going to be very, very picky children, which are classified as problem eaters when it's 20 foods or less. And they could be crying and throwing tantrums when presented with food that they've never seen before. And they usually stick to that one food group, like I was saying. So some types of foods. This is important to know because if you have a child who only eats crunchy foods or only eats smooth foods, then you need to know the different types of textures and the taste that you're asking the child to try, because you want to kind of keep it similar. You don't want to completely throw them off. So the different textures are crunchy, chewy, hard, lumpy, and smooth. And then for taste, we all know these: the salty, the sweet, the tangy, spicy, and bland. And even though it might not seem like a big deal for us, it could affect a child with sensory-based feeding disorders detrimentally by switching them up on stuff that they're not used to. All right, so sensory reactions. And here's another quote. So sensory processing refers to the ability to register, process, and organize sensory information and to execute appropriate responses to environmental demands, which may manifest as over or under sensitive to the stimuli. So something that you're going to see with over responsiveness, which means they're hypersensitive. You're going to see like avoidance, gagging, crying, trying to push away from the food. If you see in the picture, there's this child who's holding his nose. He's not wanting anything to do with the food. Those are signs of hypersensitive, which is over-responsive sensory reactions. And then if you have a child who is under-responsive or hyposensitive, you're going to see pocketing the food in the mouth and that type of thing, where they're not getting enough sensory input. All right, so some intervention types. So one of the things you can look at is sensory play before feeding. And this can help by stimulating the senses and kind of trying to integrate them into being prepared for the food. So playing with toys, with toy foods, that can help. Swinging on swings, so that vestibular play is really, really good for these kids. And using the Wilberg brushing technique. This is my favorite one. I really, really like this. I've seen it used, and I've seen that how much it really helps. So I think that this is a really good one when we discuss the techniques in class. And then there's tactile play, which is also really important. And then stimulating the mouth, as you see in the picture with the little boy. A few other ways from stimulating the mouth that doesn't include specific kind of harder to find things. So this is just some things that you can tell your patients to work on at home with their family. So blowing bubbles, using a vibration toothbrush instead of a regular one, encouraging the child to blow into musical instruments, chewing gum, playing funny faces. And those are all ways to stimulate the mouth and prepare for that feeding time. All right, so another intervention is food chaining. So food chaining enables the child to try new foods that are similar to the foods that the child is used to eating. This is when we talked about those textures and those tastes and how they're broken down. You don't want to go from a child only eating smooth foods and jumping all the way into crunchy foods. You want to kind of try to slowly progress them. Something that's really important to remember is all of these processes are going to be really, really slow because it takes a while to gain those new textures and shapes and colors. And so it's really important not to change, but so much. So you want to do that slow process of changing slowly at a time. So another thing with food chaining is 3 meals and 3 snacks are important for this intervention. It's going to be a slow process, and so how you start is you take time to figure out what the child eats consistently and what textures, colors, shapes are the foods they like. So you have to really figure out what foods they like so you kind of have a baseline of where to start. And it's also important to be very structured with this intervention. Using a schedule for eating times is very helpful. So something important to know about food chaining as well is positive behavior can be rewarded with this intervention. However, negative behavior is disregarded. So if your child refuses to eat the food for, let's say, snack in between breakfast and lunch, then their punishment would only be that all right, well, you don't have to eat the snack, but we're going to come back for lunch. But they can't eat anything, no candies in between. They're got to wait until their lunchtime. So that's really important with this food chaining intervention. And here's just a picture to kind of give you a little look into what food chaining is. You see that all the foods are green. They might look nasty, but they're all green. And you might have some different textures and some different taste, but they're all trying to be similar, or we've got, the crunchy here and the smooth here. So it's very important to keep that. You don't want to overwhelm the child. All right, so another intervention, this one's my favorite. It's sequential oral sensory approach, SOS, which we talked about in class before. And the bottom left-hand corner, I've provided a link for that. I found that there's actually a website for the SOS approach, and they give you lots and lots of resources. It's a really, really good place. If you have a parent that is more curious about this intervention, you can look into this and maybe provide this for them. And then in the right-hand corner, I have a YouTube link if you want to click into that, and you will be able to see a little bit more into what SOS does in a more visual way. All right, so the evidence-based approach is very slow but a proven intervention for treating sensory-based feeding disorders. It begins by getting the child used to having the food in the same room with them and then slowly getting more comfortable before being around food. All right, so you kind of usually start with just being in the same room with them and getting closer and just being more comfortable with that food. And then there's going to be the touching the food with your fingers, smelling it, picking the food up, putting it in your face, kissing it, licking it, nibbling it, and finally eating it are all the crucial parts of this intervention. So it's a 32 steps to this intervention. It's a very long one, but I think that it's so beneficial. Modeling, lots of praise, playing, never forcing, and reading body languages are all vital elements to this intervention. And then here's a picture. So if you look at it, this kind of gives you step by step what this intervention does, the steps that they look at. So this is also very important for the SOS approach. All right, so the next intervention is crumbs. So it starts with small amounts of food and slowly increases the size of the amount little by little. So you're going to start, yes, with tiny crumbs. And gradually you're going to make the food bigger and bigger each time. So maybe they progress to a little crumb, to a little bit bigger and bigger, and then maybe half a cookie, and then maybe eventually get all the way up to a full cookie. So that would be an example for crumbs. So important things to take into consideration when you're working with the children with sensory-based food disorders, anytime you're working with food, you need to be aware that choking could be a problem. So make sure they're not taking huge bites, or when they're pocketing that food, that they're being safe. And you got to be aware of allergies. Some children have peanut allergies. They can be allergic to all different kinds of things. So you need to be really aware of that before you choose your food items that you're going to work on. Be aware of body language. You don't want your child to regress. You don't want to force your child to eat because this will only make the child regress and not move forward. So that's a really important thing to consider. So some resource handouts for at home. I made these myself, and I have a handout. If you'd like to have them, just email me and I can send you my documents for this. So eating together as a family in order to model eating. That's a really big one that I've found in my research. So this is also a parent resource handout. So start with what they eat and build from there. Use similar textures and colors to slowly change components of the food your child likes. Make the same food a little bit different. Try changing brands, flavors, etc. Routines are important to allow your child to know what is expected of them. So try to prepare the mouth before feeding by washing your child's face. All right, so this is the fun part. So this is just a few little different ideas to give the parents that you're working with as far as using food as play. So if you can see, there's slimy spaghetti sensory bin, which is in the first picture. And then you can use rice and pasta to play with and make it colorful in the bottom picture. And then you can use soapy sea foam, painting with condiments, sauces, pudding, sour cream, scooping out pumpkin guts and picking out the seeds, kneading dough, making homemade Play-Doh, playing in Jell-O, Cool Whip, bobbing for apples, rolling cookie dough into balls, and making a necklace with Fruit Loops. All of these, anything would do, but all of these are just some ideas that could help your the parents that you're working with. Just give them a little bit of an idea of what we mean by using food as play. All right, so this is a big one. So it's praise and encourage for any interaction with food. So this definitely goes hand in hand with the SOS approach, which is my favorite. So you want to constantly tell them, hey, even though it might seem like a small step, even if they only touch it or they only smell it or only lick the food, it's a huge step in the right direction for your child. So it's so important to encourage the child for interaction with food, even if it doesn't make it to their mouth every time. I know it can be hard sometimes, but it's important for the child and the parent to acknowledge praise and move forward. So I have a few examples of, you did a great job, you put so much effort into that, you did good job, buddy, I'm so proud of you for trying something new. All of these are just some little ways that you can encourage your child to keep trying new things, because even though it may not seem a lot to us, it is a huge step in the right direction for them. All right, so in conclusion, if you'd like any of these resources, please email me. I'd be more than happy to share. And then I will be showing you my social story that I found, and I found this on a free resource online. And I made the home resources handouts myself. So here are my references, and I will show you the social story. All right, so I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is pretty long, but I just wanted to give you a little look into what this actually is. We all know what social stories are. We talked about them in class. I found this one, and I absolutely love it. I think it's so good. But it's talking about trying new foods, and it kind of goes through, and it gives you a little column to put foods that the child likes and the foods the child doesn't like. And it kind of goes through and talks about the benefits of eating healthy and trying new things and that kind of thing. And I will give you all the link to that if you'd like it. But that is it. Thank you so much for listening.